Hello, and welcome to Out West, the official podcast of the Western Governors Association. I'm Jack Waldorf, Executive Director of WGA. For more than 25 years, Western Governors have championed protections for Good Samaritans, organizations and individuals who voluntarily clean up abandoned mine sites. Without reform, these groups risk liability under federal laws like the Clean Water Act, CERCLA, and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. The scale of the problem is immense. The U.S. Government Accountability Office reports more than 140,000 abandoned hard rock mines in the West alone, with estimates climbing as high as 390,000. Many have sat idle for decades, posing serious safety risks and polluting Western waterways. Last December, Congress took action by passing the Good Samaritan Remediation of Abandoned Hard Rock Mines Act. The law launches a pilot program allowing cleanup at 15 mine sites without fear of liability, a landmark step to accelerate reclamation across the region. Now, EPA plans to review applications this November. As they prepare to open the process, EPA continues to work with states, tribes, and stakeholders to share and finalize guidelines. EPA hopes to have the first tranche of projects approved by as early as March 2026. For this episode, I sat down with Colorado Senator John Hickenlooper, one of the bill's original co-sponsors, who also tackled this issue as governor from 2011 to 2018. You'll also hear from WGA Policy Advisor Abby Pelsmacher, who spoke with David Hockey, the Acting Director of EPA's Office of Mountains, Deserts, and Plains, Chris Wood, CEO of Trout Unlimited, and Rob Galleri, Administrator of Nevada Division of Minerals. Together, they'll share why this legislation matters, how the pilot program will work, and what kinds of projects could finally move forward under its protections. Let's dive in. So I'm honored to be joined by U.S. Senator and former Western Governor from the great state of Colorado, John Hickenlooper. Senator Hickenlooper was instrumental getting this bill passed and signed into law last year and was a leading advocate for offering Good Samaritan protections while serving as governor. Senator, it's always good to see you.
Nice to see you, Jack.
Well, I'd love to hear about the underlying need for this legislation in the West and throughout the country and the bipartisan efforts that help get it across the finish line.
Well, it is something that's been debated and we've worked hard on this for, God, when I was in Western Governor starting in 2011, we talked about it every year. There's 140,000 abandoned mines throughout the West, almost 25,000 in Colorado. And the way it was set up, if you were a nonprofit or you were a county, with a serious water pollution issue coming out of an old set of mine tailings, you could not work on that problem because the moment you touched it, you accepted total liability for all the pollution going downstream. So nobody would ever do anything about all these, 140,000 abandoned mines. Almost every one of them has some sort of environmental problem, almost all of it connected to water. So Martin Heinrich was terrific on this. He's the ranking member. Jim Risch, former governor. We had a dinner, just before the recess, where I had the five of the six Republican senators who had been formerly governors, and then the other five beside myself, Democratic senators who had been formerly governors. We all had dinner at my house and talked about things like this. What are the things that we know as governors we should be able to get things done? And this is an example where Risch and Heinrich and myself and a bunch of us just kept kind of pushing and trying to bring as much broad wave of support. And Western Governors Association was a big part of that. WGA helped us marshal citizen groups, nonprofits, county and municipal groups, Congress bringing up pressure and stuff can get done.
Well, and you mentioned WGA and Western Governors helping push that. I'd maybe pull on that thread a little bit. I'd love to hear your take as a former governor and how the governor's advocacy over the years have played such a key role in getting this across the finish line.
Well, for governors, we're at the point of contact. In other words, in our state, we are every day dealing with county commissioners and municipal mayors and city councils who are dealing with the pollution. And in many places in the West, obviously you don't want to drink the water coming out of an old mine, but you can't even touch it. Some of it is so acidic and so polluted. So as governors, we heard about it all the time. And it was very frustrating when you got, let's say a wealthy philanthropist, someone who's very involved in the community, retired, made a great deal of money, and they bought a beautiful ranch, and they got some pollution coming out of a hillside. They can't touch it. In a couple of instances, these guys wanted to spend tens of millions of dollars to try and solve a problem that's saving the public money. And yet they did that, they would have to accept responsibility for all the pollution that's happened before and all the pollution that might still come. Even let's say they solve half the problem. they would be financially responsible for the other half of the problem.
Obviously, it took decades to get this thing passed, right? And now it's enacted into law. And, now the real work begins to get this actually implemented. So I'd be curious from your viewpoint, in the short term, what are the necessary next steps to get this program up and running and hopefully see its success?
Well, success begets success. I don't like using words like beget because I haven't had to take an SAT test in a long time. Success creates success. Let's put it that way. A little less biblical. Um, we've got 7 years. That's what the bill allows us to make a real strong forward step on this. And I think it'll be important to make sure that these initial places where we intercede, either through an organization or a company or an individual, try to remediate one of these old mines. We want to make sure we don't pick on anything that's too complicated or has even a remote potential of making it worse, of things getting out of control. So I think we'll pick fairly straightforward problems, which we are fairly confident that we know the answers to.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's only authorized for 7 years. So, I think your perspective is a unique one. I think you talked about your fellow Western governors who are now also fellow U.S. senators. What can current Western governors do to ensure that program success becomes permanent and show Congress 7 years from now, through working with EPA and others, that it can be a successful model to address not just the 15 projects, but thousands that are unmet at this point?
Well, I think it'll be important for the governors to track and keep records of how much pollution we're avoiding. I know every local newspaper in any of the mountain towns of Colorado would love to run a story of somebody who's spending a few $1 million to make the water cleaner. And I think those stories create a forward momentum of success and will lead to other successful efforts. And, hopefully, if we can make sure that people are reading about it in the paper, seeing it on TV, that we're moving in the right direction, we're cleaning up these rivers, we're making our water cleaner, that by the end of 7 years, we will have a landscape where it's almost expected that we'll take this and expand it forever. Just open it up until we see some reason to change it. This is the right way to go about cleaning up our landscapes. Because despite CERCLA and some of the laws that are meant to protect the public and make sure we clean these things up, we haven't cleaned very many of them up. Look at how many small mines and all the distributed sources of water pollution. If we begin cleaning that up, I think the public will get very quickly accustomed to forward progress, and they'll encourage other landowners, other businesses, other philanthropies to step up and do their part.
Well, and we talked about the decades leading up to it, your leadership while you were governor, now obviously in the Senate. I think the current governors have a responsibility, as you said, to get that. And I think then the next crop of governors down the road, it's 7 years is a long time. We'll have some new governors in the next few years, incumbent upon them to keep that advocacy going forward. So I think the leadership that you helped pave as part of that process is a good guiding post.
It's part of what makes being governor fun is that you actually are on the front lines on a circumstance like this where there's a new law, people can actually start making a serious improvement in water quality.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this important legislation, not just for the West, but across the country. And looking forward to keeping you apprised of all the good updates in the West and how these projects are being implemented. So thank you.
No, my pleasure.
We turn now to WGA Policy Advisor Abby Pelsmacher, who spoke with some of the experts involved with implementing and executing the Good Samaritans program. Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Jack. To begin, I sat down with David Hockey, the Acting Director of the EPA Office of Mountain Deserts and Plains. With EPA overseeing the pilot program, David explained what the rollout may look like in the coming months and years. David, could you give us a quick overview of the Good Samaritans bill? What are the parameters of the program, and what does the bill outline for it?
Sure. The bipartisan law was signed in December 2024. It passed 100-0. It was very supported by both sides of the aisle. It put together a program that's been in the works for, my understanding is decades, to have Good Samaritans be able to participate more fully in the cleanup of abandoned hard rock mines. The program has 15 pilot permits that we can issue. These can be on private land, state land, or federal land. Where they're on federal land, EPA will be coordinating closely with the other federal land managers, typically the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, to issue a permit. There are several aspects to the permit. There's a component of eligibility. You cannot be a potentially responsible party under the Superfund law. You have to be willing to do the work and have the financial resources to do the work. You also have to show that your project is a low risk project. Once you're eligible, you will work with EPA and or our federal land managers. We'll put together a draft. You'll share it with us. And then that permit would be issued for the Good Samaritan to begin the work, improving that mine site.
Walk us through the timeline. I know it's a lot of work to get a program like this off the ground, but what does that time frame look like?
We have some fairly aggressive, ambitious goals. We are relying on a lot of the work that's been done in the past. If we had never been in this space working on mine cleanups, I think this would be a 2-3 year project to put together. Because we have so much experience out there with the federal land managers, with the states, within EPA, I think we're going to move a lot faster. There is no season or timing for applying, but we'll be ready sometime this fall. We see this happening in maybe 3 tranches. A lot of these are going to depend on construction seasons, where they're up north. A lot of the Colorado ones, they're inaccessible during the winter. So we think there's a first tranche. We're going to try and get ready for construction in the 26 construction season in that summer. And then through 27 and 28, we hope to get all 15 projects approved and operational by the summer of 2028.
On the funding side, some of the states have expressed that funding mechanisms could be a potential concern at the state level. Is that something that EPA is also thinking about or concerned with?
We're thinking about all different types of mechanisms. I think there are some examples that have happened out there where partners have come in to support mine cleanups. Tiffany's, for example, has supported a mine cleanup in Utah. We know that Phelps Dodge has supported another one. So we see opportunities here, the way the law is structured, for cooperating persons to either match funding. We think there's opportunities if a Good Sam raises some money through grants or community involvement, that there's opportunities for participants to match those funds. With these projects, we also have to have financial assurance. We think there's an opportunity for folks to help with corporate guarantees or letters of credit to show that they're supportive of this law. This wasn't meant to just transfer the cleanup costs from the mining industry to the taxpayer. So I think there's plenty of opportunities here for folks to participate in funding. We know that grants are difficult to come by, but there are still some significant grants and sources of funding that would help these projects move forward.
In terms of identifying low risk projects, there's thousands of mine sites that need to be cleaned up, and some of them are more ready than others to be selected for this project. How is EPA thinking about the prioritization of project selection and which projects are going to be that case study test model project?
Yeah, finding those is going to be difficult, but I think it could also be really beneficial to us because there are lots of folks who've been working on these in other ways, either through the CERCLA administrative tools, the Superfund administrative tools to try and do these. They've been doing them through state voluntary cleanup programs. So I think there's a lot of experience out there that we're going to draw on. And we're going to see those projects where people have been out in the field doing sampling, doing analysis, working with community, building those relationships, understanding the outcomes and how they're going to be beneficial for either that watershed or that community. I think those are going to rise to the top. They're going to quickly come to us and say, look, we're experienced. We've done this before. We know how to do this. To me, those types of projects are going to move through the process fairly quickly because they're the ones that are going to prove this can work for the long term.
In your mind, what do you think the risk tolerance is for some of the more unproven or innovative approaches to doing some of the remediation work or reprocessing?
I think the way this program has been set up with 15 pilots is we can be very selective as to finding 15 really good case studies. We want 15 very successful projects. So we will be working with the applicants, like I said, prior to their submittal of an application to ensure that we're selecting projects that have the best chance for a very good outcome and that we can kind of look back on at the end of this pilot and say, this is why this law works. This is why we need this law to be a long term project and program. And we've made it successful by showing that these 15 well selected projects have really benefited the environment and the communities they're in.
At the end of the 15 projects in the 7-year window, are there any concrete or specific goals that EPA is looking at or things that would pave the way for a permanent program or mechanism to do this work?
I think this being a pilot, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to learn. We're going to get to explore kind of the bounds of this new law. Where does it make sense? Where hasn't it gone far enough? Where could we get more benefits if there were changes that could be made? So I think we're going to be able to document those things with some hard evidence as to, hey, if we could do this better, maybe a future amendment would allow us to do that. Maybe if we had this, flexibility, we could reach more sites. I think a lot of that's going to come from our working closely with our states and our other federal land managers because they're going to have perspectives on this too. So I think at the end of the day, you're going to get a very good perspective on these 15s from the local community all the way up to the federal government as to what's working, why this should be continued, and can we make it a better program to serve more communities? So I think we found an area where no matter who you are, no matter what state you're in, no matter what color that state might be on a map, everybody wants their mines cleaned up. Everybody wants their water a little better. Everybody wants their watersheds improved. Everybody wants to be able to recreate safely, be it trout fishing, tubing, whatever it is. Folks want a cleaner environment to do those types of things.
Next, we heard from Chris Wood of Trout Unlimited, a nonprofit group that has been cleaning up abandoned mines and advocating for Good Samaritan legislation for decades. Chris, thanks for being here. Can you give us a better idea of the scale and the prevalence of this issue, especially in the West?
Yeah, abandoned mines are perhaps the least discussed, most pernicious source of water quality degradation across the Western United States in particular, but really across America. It's just that most of the mining that occurred in the Eastern United States happened a long, long time ago, even before the gold rush of the 1850s. But abandoned mines are a scourge. They're literally a scourge on the landscape. The EPA estimates that 40% of all Western headwater streams are negatively affected by abandoned mines. And these are mines that there's no corporate entity that you can go after. There's no responsible party that we can take to court and sue and force them to clean up these messes. So as a result of that, they sit there on the landscape, releasing this toxic brew of zinc and cadmium and arsenic and lead, making our rivers more unhealthy, our communities more unhealthy, and, not insignificantly for Trout Unlimited, trout and salmon populations unhealthy.
So when we talk about cleaning up abandoned mine sites, there's some obvious environmental impacts, but there's also, impacts on local communities and wildlife and local environment. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that ecosystem and how doing this remediation and cleanup work can really impact those landscapes?
Yes. So abandoned mines have profound water quality impacts for the reasons I stated earlier. And that can lead to everything from increased water filtration costs for downstream communities to fish populations being negatively affected. It can make our children sick. I remember one of our first projects that we accomplished was in partnership with the Snowbird Ski and Summer Resort. This is probably 20 years ago now. And I was thinking, well, what would be the next big thing at Trout Unlimited? And I thought, well, it'll be cleaning up abandoned mines because these things, as I said earlier, are a scourge on the landscape. There's no constituency for acid mine drainage. No one supports yellow rivers. There's no lobby group back here in DC advocating for these things. This should be a layup. And we realized we had to change the law to do it, but we thought by
having a pilot project or two, we could prove the lunacy of the status quo. And so we began conversations with Snowbird. They had these tailings piles up in one of their watersheds in a place called American Fork Creek. And when I went to visit the site, they had these piles of tailings that were adjacent to this American Fork Creek, which had Bonneville cutthroat trout in it, which is why we cared. But the fellow who took me on the tour, I saw these paths going over the piles. And I said, "What are those?" And he said, "Those are dirt bike trails." I said, "They're what?" He said, "Yeah, they're dirt bike trails. The kids come up here and they take their dirt bikes and they go over these piles, they jump them." And he then told me in the next breath that the lead levels on those tailing piles were 1,100 times the federal standard. So we had kids out there doing wheelies and jumps, basically making that dust go airborne as they used their mountain bikes to go over those piles. And, those kids could potentially get sick. And so that's a good description of the kind of human impact that these abandoned mines can have. But the reason I started to tell you that story is we wanted to create a pilot project or two in a high visibility area that had a lot of people coming through it. We wanted this to be something that we could point toward as an example of just how, ludicrous the status quo was. And so we began conversations with Snowbird. They said, "We'll let you clean this up, but we won't do it because we don't want to become part of the chain of custody. We don't want to become a potentially responsible party by touching it because, this is one of these situations where, you touch it, you own it. It's highly unlikely that the federal government's going to come after a would-be good Samaritan who makes things better on the ground, but an adjacent landowner might, because under the Clean Water Act, you could file a citizen suit and say, "Hey, thanks, Snowbird, for getting this to 90% of Clean Water Act standards from 30%, but we want you to spend another several $1,000,000 to get to 100%. So we began a conversation with the EPA and then the Department of Justice, and it took us 2.5 years to negotiate the agreement to clean up, I think it was 5 tailings piles. At one point, our general counsel at the time and myself were the only two representing TU on the phone. And we had a phalanx of EPA lawyers and Department of Justice lawyers. And the lead person for EPA, in exasperation at one point, at our exasperation, said, "We're giving you a better deal than we've ever given any other potentially responsible party." And we stopped the call and we were like, "That's the problem. We're not a PRP. We're not a potentially responsible party. We're just trying to make this better." And so it took us 2.5 years. We negotiated an agreement where we could clean up the site and walk away without fear of liability. Guess how long the project itself took to get done?
Less than a year.
8 days.
Wow.
8 days. What we did was we brought heavy equipment onto the scene, of course, with the permission of our friends at the Forest Service. They were an amazing partner, and I have been an amazing partner throughout this whole process. So is the BLM, so have the state agencies. I would be remiss to make it sound like TU's a one-man band. We're not. We've done this in partnership with the governors, WGA, the counties. As I said earlier, what's beautiful about working on abandoned mines, even though, it's kind of the red-headed stepchild of conservation, nobody wants to work on it. There's no constituency for acid mine drainage. We're not, goring anybody's ox by cleaning these things up. Everybody wants to help. So we've had tremendous partnerships, but we dug a hole. We took a bulldozer. We lined that hole with an impermeable barrier. We bulldozed the tailings into the hole. We put another impermeable barrier over it. We spread soil across the top. We planted native vegetation. We dug a French drain around the repository that we had created. And then in this case, we actually built, we don't normally do this, but we built a guardrail around the repository to keep the kids from riding their dirt bikes over it. And that became the poster child project. And the only reason we were able to do it, just to be clear, was because the Forest Service agreed to have the repository that carried the waste on its land. And so we've been able to do 40 or 50 abandoned mine cleanups in the intervening years, but only because the agencies, the federal agencies, primarily the Forest Service and the BLM, they agree to have that work on their land. So they are potentially liable for a citizen suit or for something else. But if you're the federal government, your pockets are a tad deeper than if you're a nonprofit like Trout Unlimited.
I know one of the other sort of permit eligibility requirements in the legislation is that the Good Samaritans have to have the resources to complete the permitted work. I think one of the big questions here is why would an organization voluntarily pay to remediate the environmental effects of abandoned mine that they didn't cause and that they don't own? And really, just what's the impetus for being a Good Samaritan?
I mean, look, trout and salmon need cold, clean water every day, and that's the mission of Trout Unlimited is to make sure that trout and salmon have cold, clean water and healthy habitats every day. And we've done, dare I say, tens of thousands of miles of stream restoration all around the country. And but everyone's been afraid to sort of address this abandoned mine problem because of the liability issues. And so if you care about clean water, if you care about having your rivers fishable and swimmable and clean so that you can reduce water filtration costs, that's the reason to do this. It shouldn't be a finger pointing exercise about the evil industry or the forebears of the evil industry caused this. They should pay to clean it up. To be certain, I do think that there should be a remediation fund that's paid for by a royalty on the production of hard rock minerals, just like we have for oil, just like we have for gas, just like we have for coal, just like we have for about every other commodity in the United States. But while I say that, I should also point out that one of the biggest supporters of our abandoned mine cleanup work has been the mining industry. The status quo doesn't work in anybody's advantage. It doesn't help the mining industry for people like me to say that 40% of Western streams are deleteriously affected by abandoned mine waste because that hurts the prospect of them creating the social license that they need to move forward with future projects. And I also think, that's a little bit cynical, but it's probably more pragmatic. But the other part of this is that most of these mining companies, their members are Trout Unlimited members. They're the people who work for them, or their employees, not their members, but they love to fish and hunt too. And I think it's probably a big morale boost for the company, for their employees to know that, the powers that be, they're not just trying to make a buck and, make sure the shareholders are getting their ROI, but they're also out there making sure that the places that I hunt and fish are healthier for me and my kids. So in the fall, when we go want to shoot an elk, or spring or summer, we want to go fishing before runoff or after runoff, we can do that. And so there's a whole host of reasons why this should be done. But to go back to your original question, you're absolutely right. A would-be Good Samaritan will not be approved under this pilot program if they don't have the financial resources and they can't demonstrate that they have the financial resources to get the project done. And in the absence of having a reclamation fund, which, my gosh, should be the next thing on the docket, what we do is we go out and we raise money from our members, from foundations. The Tiffany and Company Foundation invested millions of dollars in abandoned mine cleanup over the past 15 years. We have great state partners who've invested in this. And of course, our friends at the EPA and the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management all have been partners in helping to pay for these cleanups. We hope that will continue.
You've really touched on why we need to be doing this work. And there's hundreds of thousands of these sites across the West and across the country that cleaning up the 15 and allotted in the pilot program isn't necessarily going to make a significant dent in the issue, but the ultimate goal is obviously some sort of long-term or permanent mechanism that can allow for this work to be done. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to share about the pilot program and if there's suggestions of things you could do to make sure that this program is successful and paves the way for future legislation and policy mechanisms.
Yeah, it's a great question, Abby. I mean, I'm very comfortable that the EPA is on a good course right now in terms of implementing regulations that will ensure that these 15 pilots are successful. While we do want to learn what works well, what doesn't, and why, it's important that these all work, right? And we've had 40 over the past 20 years. None of them have failed. They all work. They all should work now. If EPA does a good job of selecting the right projects, they will all work. We will be coming back after 15 projects have been successfully implemented over a 7-year period and going back to Congress and saying, okay, make this permanent. Let's create a program where we can actually begin to get after the hundreds of thousands of abandoned mines that you just referenced that need to be cleaned up.
For a state perspective, I spoke with Rob Galeri, Administrator from Nevada Division of Minerals. Rob's office runs the state's Physical Safety Abandoned Mine Land Program, which works to inventory abandoned mine sites and remediate the hazards associated with them. Rob told us about the unique position that states occupy under the Good Samaritan's Bill and how the program will help kickstart mine cleanups in Nevada. Rob, to start, could you tell us a bit about what techniques and strategies have worked well for remediating Hardrock mine sites before this new pilot program came along?
We learned early on in this program, and especially when I took over the program about 10 years ago, partnership is key. Getting anything done is going to be very difficult if you're trying to do it by yourselves, especially in the state of Nevada, where over 85% of the state is federal lands. Every project we work on has a partnership with the federal land manager. It's actually really rare for us to do a project where the federal partner is not involved. So we've learned early on of utilizing the resources, and that is anything from experience and expertise to funding mechanisms and permitting to get projects done in an efficient manner. So that really overlaps really closely with the EPA Good Samaritan pilot project that's coming forward. Is we already have a good, strong relationship with the federal partners, other state agencies, and even industry in the state of Nevada to start looking and developing good projects to move forward and showcase in this new law.
As I understand it, under the Good Sam law, states are in a bit of a unique position because they can either be sort of part of that review process, but also can also be Good Samaritans themselves. What does that look like in playing that dual role, and how does that coordination take place with EPA and some of the other federal land management agencies?
States really do fall in a unique role in this case. The states could be the Good Samaritans themselves, working and looking to identify a cleanup project on federal lands where they would then seek the liability protection that wouldn't be there right now. We could also partner with the industry. Let's say a mining operation would like to clean up an abandoned mine site that's 5 miles from their project. They've been wanting to do it. It's not on their claims. It's not in their plan of operations, but they want to do it and they don't have the experience and expertise. So we could work with them to walk them through and help guide as a project manager of the work that needs to be done. But then you also mentioned the states, and one of the things early on identified by multiple states is we would like to not be an approval level of any of these projects, but at least coordinate with the EPA on the projects that are being proposed and have that cooperation with them because we have the idea of we're not afraid of any of this happening because we understand the importance of this. But if by some case a project does get worse, and then it would fall into the responsible party, the state would also be involved in the need for the cleanup at that point in time, especially because states like the state of Nevada have primacy on a lot of different aspects through the EPA and others. So we would be then working with them. So states really want to ensure that the projects that are being selected in their states are going to be successful and they're going to demonstrate the need and purpose of this law. We are the true multi-tool for this, where we could be involved in any aspect from just review to funding to actually running the projects ourselves.
Once these sites have been remediated and successfully cleaned up, can they be repurposed and serve other land uses after? And what does that look like in the context of a permit for doing the Good Sam's work? And how does that look like post remediation?
So for a lot of these sites in the state of Nevada and projects we worked on, we've had a lot of ideas for large scale projects. There was a project we did in southern Nevada, just outside of Las Vegas, that if we had a sufficient funding mechanism for it, it would turn into a trail system and an opportunity for the county to utilize as a park and recreation area. However, we're able to eliminate the immediate physical safety dangers, but we don't have the millions of dollars that would take to take it to that next level. There's been sites in Nevada that we would like to do tap cover and some removal actions on tailings that have really, really low pHs. I'm talking pH 1 to 2 level when there's water sitting in it. And there isn't the money necessary to clean it up because those would be great solar sites for additional brownfield development in some of these areas. There's other states, and I use Pennsylvania as a good example because they have a really robust abandoned mine lands program. And internally in their state, they actually have their own Good Samaritan law. And they've taken large coal seams and cleaned them up and turned them into recreation areas for off-road driving opportunities. They've used them for reintroduction of elk populations in the east. They've used them for other opportunities. So there are the experiences and the ability to do that type of work. It's just the funding is really lacking to be able to take these projects to that next level.
What else do states really need in order to successfully implement this program? I mean, we talked about the funding, but is capacity a concern? Are there, any other factors that would move the needle for states to be able to implement the pilot program and also just extend beyond that?
Yeah, the pilot program, I think the mechanisms are already in place for what we need to demonstrate the success of this pilot program. What we're going to need for states is take it from a pilot program and make it a permanent program. That's going to be really big to be able to help encourage and increase the contributions from industry and NGOs and others. Personnel is always going to be like focus, especially at the federal level. The state of Nevada BLM, who we work with on a constant basis, has struggled for the last 20 years on keeping enough qualified staff in their offices. So having those opportunities in the West, we're going to need to work with the federal land managers. But the states believe that the expertise has consistently resided in the state's programs and the state systems. So having a dedicated funding mechanism to the BLM and other federal programs, but also to the states to where we could take that money and utilize it in a much more efficient fashion with collaboration, cooperation with those agencies, I think would really allow the states and others to get the work done.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Out West, presented by the Western Governors Association. To learn more about our bipartisan policy work, please visit us at westgov.org. Before we end, I would like to thank former Western Governor Senator John Hickenlooper, David Hockey, Chris Wood, and Rob Galeri for sharing their experience and expertise with us. And finally, we hope to see all of you in Scottsdale, Arizona for WGA's winter meeting on November 20th and 21st. Until then, we'll see you out west.